Hello, and welcome to another episode of Her Head in Films. I'm Caitlin, and I'm your host. Longtime listeners might notice something very different at the beginning of this episode. I now have music for the Her Head in Films podcast. If you like the song and you want to know who it's by, it is a classical piece. It's by Felix Mendelssohn. It's his Songs Without Words, Opus 30, number 1. It's a song that I've loved for years. It was featured in the film Sophie's Choice. It was part of the music, the soundtrack of that film. And ever since then, I've just been so in love with it. And so I'm really happy to have it as the music for my podcast now. And so it'll be the intro music. It'll be music in between, to transition between different parts of the podcast, and you'll hear it at the end. And so I hope that you enjoy it. I've been wanting to add music to the podcast for a long time now, and I was finally able to, so I hope you enjoy it. So on this podcast, Her Head in Films, I share my thoughts and feelings about the films that I watch. They tend to be art house and world cinema. What makes this podcast unique is that I weave together my life experiences with an in-depth discussion of the films that I love. I explore the impact that cinema has on me and why I connect so deeply to it. As I like to say, my head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films. Today's episode is about Michael Haneke's 2001 film, The Piano Teacher. I'm talking about this film because I want to explore Isabelle Huppert's performance in the film. It's bold, it's brave, it's unforgettable, it's brutal. It's unlike any performance that I've ever seen in my life, and I first saw this film several years ago, and it has stayed with me ever since, and I had to talk about it. It's part of a series I will be doing about some of my favorite performances by women, and I will share those episodes with you in the coming weeks and talk about different actresses and the performances that just absolutely astonish me. And Isabelle Huppert's performance in The Piano Teacher is one of those. So I talk about the film in depth. I really go through it scene by scene and talk about it. And there are spoilers. I talk about the ending. I think it is best for you to see the film before you listen to this episode. I know some of you don't care about spoilers. I know it doesn't bother some of you. But for this film in particular, I would insist that you see the film first before you listen to this episode. I think that this film, everybody should experience this film for the first time in a pure way, without knowing what's coming, without knowing what's going to happen. It's a violent film, it's a brutal film, but I think it's important and I think it has a lot to say. And that's what I talk about in this episode. And I hope that you'll listen to it, and I hope that you'll get something out of it. Her Head in Films has a Patreon where you can financially support the podcast on a monthly basis and also access rewards and extras. You can find more information at patreon.com/herheadinfilms. That's patreon.com/herheadinfilms. At one level, you get a shout out on each episode. First, I'd like to give a big welcome to my new patron, Juan. Thank you so much for being a patron. I'd also like to give a shout out to my longtime patrons, Iris, Teal, JD, Vanessa, Spunden, Polina, Olivia, Carolyn, Jessie, Feminist Overlord, Michelle, and Lindsay. Her Head in Films is listener supported, and I intend to keep it that way. So I thank all of you for being patrons. If financial support isn't an option, and I totally understand if it isn't, please consider reviewing the podcast on iTunes, because reviews and ratings help people discover the podcast. Or you can tell your friends and followers about Her Head in Films, or you can interact with me on social media. I'm on Facebook at Her Head in Films. I'm on Instagram at Her Head in Films, and you can find all of my social media accounts in the show notes of each episode. So I would love to interact with you if you'd like to. So now I'm going to talk all about The Piano Teacher. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Michael Haneke and Isabelle Huppert. And then I'm going to go scene by scene and delve very deeply into this film. Teacher is not an easy film to talk about. It's not an easy film to watch. But I do think it's one of those films that sears itself into your memory. And I came to this film when I was early in my art house cinema journey. I think I watched it around 2011 or 2012. And I really, at that time, was not prepared for it when I watched it. And I don't think you're ever fully prepared for a Michael Haneke film. But this one in particular is very violent. It's very brutal. It is a grueling experience to watch it. And I can only imagine that Isabelle Huppert's performance as she was living it and doing it must have been very grueling on her mind and on her body. But Isabelle is never afraid to delve into performances like this and to portray women like this. So before I got into the film, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about Michael Haneke and Isabelle Huppert. I had planned to do a much more in-depth look at them, but things just sort of didn't work out that way for me. And I'm not saying I'm rushing with this episode, but it's the end of the week, and it just, things have not come together for me with this episode. But what I've learned through doing this podcast on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, is that sometimes your best has to be enough, and whatever you have to give is what you have to give. And so I do research and I do things, but there comes a point when I actually have to record the episode. And sometimes I have it and sometimes I don't. I don't know if I have it right now, what I need to talk about this film. But I had done research, it got messed up, and I don't have time to redo it. And so I'm just going to do my best with it. Anything that I have to say about Haneke and Huppert is really not any kind of substitute to reading their interviews, learning about them, reading books about them. And I obviously can't go that in depth with these people. I wish I could, but it's just not possible. So I thought I'd just give you an idea of some of their work and things about them. But what I really want this episode to be about, and what I want it to be dedicated to fully, is an in-depth analysis of The Piano Teacher. Like, I want to talk about this film. I want to go very deep into it, almost scene by scene at times. I'm definitely going to sort of go chronologically through the film, and I'm going to talk about certain scenes. And I'm going to talk about this character that Isabelle Huppert plays, named Erica Kohut. And she is a piano teacher, and she is masochistic, and there are very dark and disturbing and violent and troubling things that happen in this film. And it's a very brutal film to watch and to put yourself through, but I have put myself through it about 2 times now, because I first watched it around 2011, 2012, and now I'm watching it again with a new set of eyes. You know, after watching art house cinema for years now, since 2011, being very serious about art house cinema, I don't know if I see the film differently, but I am excited to be able to talk about it, and so that's where I want most of my focus to go. But I will talk a few moments about Haneke and Huppert, even though there's not really much that I have to contribute that other reviewers or other writers have not already written, and with much more insight and much more depth than I could ever have. But Michael Haneke is an Austrian director. He was born in 1942, and so he's 76 years old right now as I record this episode in 2018. He's someone, I've seen several of his films. I've seen The Piano Teacher, as you can tell. I've seen The White Ribbon, and I've seen Amour. And those are the 3 films by him that I've seen. And all of them sort of represent, I would say, a pretty bleak view of life. And all of them are difficult to watch, but The Piano Teacher in particular and Amour is really intense. And I won't give away what happens in that. obviously with my review of The Piano Teacher, there's going to be spoilers, and I'm going to talk about this film. And so if you haven't seen it, you need to see it, because it will be ruined for you. It just will be. The ending is very shocking. So I would urge you to watch the film. It's on Filmstruck right now, and I'm sure it's available for you to rent anywhere, I would think. But it is on Filmstruck if you subscribe to that website in the United States. And so Haneke's films are always concerned with violence. That is one of his main focuses, or his primary focus. And a big film of his is called Funny Games. I haven't seen that one, but it is one of his more important films that he's made. And it's also on Filmstruck if you want to seek it out. But I've heard that it's very violent, it's very difficult to watch. And The Piano Teacher is very similar in that way. His work is concerned with violence. I think he's concerned with... He's not concerned with the why. He's not interested in giving reasons for people's violence necessarily, or having it all come together in a nice bow at the end. I think he's more concerned with how violence affects people, and also how violence gets represented in popular culture, how we as people, through the internet, through television, through movies also, are very desensitized to violence. And I think that his films purposely are trying to shock people and are purposely trying to be brutal, because I think he wants to wake his audience up. He doesn't want them to sort of silently accept violence and accept what's happening in the world. Another big film of his, I think, is called Code Unknown, which has Juliette Binoche in it, and there's Cachet, which I have not seen, and I haven't seen Code Unknown. There's so many films that I have not seen, so I still have a lot of Haneke to explore. I like his work, even though it's brutal, and I guess one would ask, why would you put yourself through his films? Why would you put yourself through something like The Piano Teacher? I can't quite explain it, but I am drawn to films that are critiquing violence, that are exploring violence, that are trying to shock and awaken audiences. Too often in films, violence becomes spectacle. Violence becomes, something that is titillating or that turns people on. And I think somebody like Haneke is not trying to do that at all. He's trying to make violence real to people. And on the Filmstruck website, and I think this is also included in the Criterion Collection DVD of The Piano Teacher, he talks about how he thinks that this kind of violence that titillates and that becomes spectacle is pornographic. That to him, that is what is real pornography. He wants to make us, I think, these are my thoughts, I think he wants to make us sensitive to violence again, to make us feel it. And I talked a bit about this in a previous episode on Guillermo del Toro's film Pan's Labyrinth, which has a great deal of violence because it takes place a few years after the Spanish Civil War, and it's about a little girl, or a 12 or 13-year-old girl, trying to navigate this world of violence and fear. And in an interview for that film on my DVD, it was like an extra feature, Del Toro said something very similar to what Haneke said, in that he did not want to do violence as a spectacle. He wanted to make the audience feel it. He wanted to shock them. He didn't want to titillate or turn them on. He wanted to disgust them and make them feel that violence instead of being turned on by it, or being sort of seduced by this violence. And I think that's what Haneke's often trying to do with his films. They're brutal, but sometimes I want to watch a brutal film. There's an experience to it. I think you feel things that you don't often feel in your everyday life, that it sort of shocks you. It's almost like electroshock to your body and your mind. And I think certain films remind us of the power of cinema, of what it can do. And I certainly believe that with Haneke. And his work is so meticulous. And The Piano Teacher is very meticulous in the way the shots are set up. And he often does long shots or long sequences where he's not editing things together. The actors are performing a scene within that moment. And it's not being edited in any way. You're seeing them talk to each other and interact with each other. You're not seeing a lot of reverse shots and things like that. They are in that moment doing that scene. And there is one in The Piano Teacher in particular where it's like 7 minutes and there is no cutting. It is one continuous scene that the actors had to perform. And what it takes to do that, both actors have to be completely in sync and on point and know their lines and know what they want, know what they're supposed to do. And it just makes those scenes even more intense. So he's very much an auteur in the traditional sense. He writes all of his own films. He often comes up with those stories himself. The Piano Teacher is the only of his feature films to be adapted from a novel. He did do some adaptations because he worked in television for a while, and then he got to make feature films. And I think he's going to come out soon with a serialized thing, like, I don't know if you'd call it a mini-series or something like that, but he is going to work with the serialized format, which will be interesting to see. I don't know a lot about it right now, but so he writes his own films. It's very important to him to write them. But The Piano Teacher was very different. It's based on a book by the same name by Elfriede Jelinek. And she's a Nobel Prize Literature laureate. And she wrote The Piano Teacher, and it was released in 1983. And I have not read the book. I've heard that the book is even more brutal than the film, which is very hard to believe. But he changed a lot of things. And he said the only way that he would make the film, because at first he was approached to write the screenplay for somebody else. And that person was never able to secure funding for the film. And so it came into Haneke's lap. And he said that the only way he would direct it is if Isabelle Huppert played the main character, the piano teacher, Erika Kohut. And she agreed. And it was the first time that she worked with Haneke. And since then, she's worked with Haneke several more times. She was in Amour, and she was in Happy End, which is Haneke's most recent film. So this was the first time he was adapting a novel, but he still made the material his own, and that was really important to him. And Elfriede Jelinek had seen the film. It's interesting. Jelinek said that the book was actually autobiographical in some ways, that some of it is based on her own relationship with her mother, which is intense. This is a film, and it's a book about a mother-daughter relationship that is very disturbing in some ways, and I'll talk about that when I get into my full analysis. So to know that it was based on autobiographical stuff is very interesting, I think. And as Haneke was filming The Piano Teacher, and it came out in 2001, I don't think I mentioned the year, as he was filming it, Jelinek's mother actually died. And so it took Jelinek a while to even watch the film. It was just too intense for her. And that was very odd timing, I think. But so Haneke borrows from the book, but he changes a lot of things. And he says in that Criterion Collection interview that there was much more backstory for Erika in the book, that we have more of a sense of her childhood and how she has become the woman that she's become. But I actually think it works in the film's favor that we don't know Erika's backstory. I think it's more powerful for some reason. I mean, I think a part of me was wondering the whole time, why is she like this? What has happened to make her like this? What has happened between her and her mother? why is their relationship this way? But I think that mystery also works, and that you can sort of make up in your mind why Erica acts the way that she does. And sometimes our childhood is not the key to who we are. Sometimes people become very violent or very bad, and they had fine childhoods, and nothing in particular happened to them. So Haneke is never trying to give you like a reason for why his characters do what they do. I think he's more interested in examining that violence, trying to make audiences awake and alert to that violence. But I don't think he's always trying to give you reasons or messages or anything. Like he says, I read some interviews, and he hates message films. He's not trying to send you a message or anything. He's not trying to tell you what to think. And he has said this in interviews. He wants you to think for yourself. And in the show notes, I'll share some of the interviews that I read from him. He's a fascinating man, and unfortunately, even though he's very intellectual and smart, and I think he's genius personally, I do love his work, he had some very disappointing and outmoded viewpoints on the Me Too movement. And I'm actually going to do a bonus episode for my patrons on Patreon. And it's going to be about what Haneke had to say about the Me Too movement. And it's going to be about my reaction and my response to what he has to say. Because he did an interview where he talked about it. And it was really disappointing to me what he had to say. So if you're a patron where you get to listen to my extra episodes, if you're on that level, then you'll get to hear that. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts about it because it really upset me. So if you want to hear my thoughts about that, you'll have to become a patron. Now I want to talk about Isabelle Huppert. What can you even say about Isabelle Huppert? Like, I'm not the person to do this. Like, I admire her. I think she's a great actress. She's one of my favorite actresses. I was really glad when recently she did get an Oscar nomination for her film Elle, and because it finally brought her sort of more global recognition or more mainstream recognition. And the same thing has sort of happened with Agnes Varda when she got her Oscar nomination and she got her honorary Oscar. It sort of took her mainstream. I remember one day I was watching E! News, because I watch E! E! The entertainment network here in the United States, it's like a entertainment news network, and they also show a lot of reality TV, unfortunately. But they have like this daily show that's about like entertainment news, right? And I still remember an episode they talked about Agnes Varda. And I think it was when she got her honorary Oscar. It was when she was with Angelina Jolie and they were like dancing. And I was like, Agnes has made it. She's on E! News. She has officially gone mainstream. And it felt that way with Isabelle Huppert a bit when she got her Oscar nomination. She's much more mainstream, although many people do probably know her from the film Heaven's Gate. That was a big film for her years ago. It was widely panned at the time, but it's now considered like a masterpiece. I haven't seen Heaven's Gate, so I can't give my opinion about that. But she is this just icon. She is such a legend. She was born in 1953. She's 65 years old as I'm recording this. So she's in her mid-60s. She's been acting for over 40 years. She's been nominated or won just about every acting award that you can possibly be nominated for. There is a Wikipedia page that is so long of the nominations and wins that she has been given as an actress. It has its own Wikipedia page. That's how many awards she's won or been nominated for. So this woman is exceptional. And the thing is that she works at a feverish pace. She does 4 to 5 films every year. And when she's not filming, she's on the theater. She's on the theater stage doing all kinds of different projects. So she's on the theater stage doing plays, and then she's also doing films. The woman never stops. She is indefatigable, right? She's indomitable. And she feels like a force of nature to me. But she's always taking on roles that are just so fascinating and different. And if you think about it, she takes on the piano teacher when she's 40. I mean, the thing about Isabelle is that while a lot of actresses, when they hit 40, the roles can dry up, or it can be harder to get roles. It seems like with Isabelle, that's not a problem at all. If anything, as she got older, she got better roles. And she got her best role when she was in her 40s with the piano teacher. This film put Michael Haneke on the map. He was already known for Funny Games and like Benny's Video, I think, was a big one too, but Funny Games was his big one. But the piano teacher is what led to his international acclaim. And I would guess that it also sort of brought Isabelle Huppert more attention as well. And so these two together are a very powerful force, but this film is about Isabelle Huppert through and through. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I'm trying to explore films that have performances by women that I just really love and that I think are really great. And this is definitely one of them. This is like in my top 10 of performances by women. I think it's one of the greatest acting performances of all time. I mean, for me, the greatest is Falconetti in The Passion of Joan of Arc. And I think that Huppert, in certain moments, reaches that almost, especially the end of this film, which I'll talk more about. But even though Isabelle has done so many roles and she's so famous, she's also very mysterious in a lot of ways. We don't know a lot about her. We don't know a lot about her personal life or her childhood. We know she has 3 children. She grew up in a suburb of Paris. She had money growing up. She wasn't working class. She wasn't struggling. But she plays characters that are just all over the map, who have so many different experiences that are very different from her own. And that's what makes her great. And I've read interviews about her and interviews that she's done about her acting process. And she says it's just a lot of thinking. I remember one I read, and I still can't find it. She says that she likes to nap a lot. That part of her process of preparing for a role is napping and thinking. And I find that fascinating. She's not a method actor from what I can tell. There was this one interview I read where she was horrified by Daniel Day-Lewis and the lengths that he goes to get into character. For Phantom Thread, he learned how to become a clothing designer and things like that. That's not what Isabelle does. Isabelle does not do that. I mean, obviously for the piano teacher, she had to learn how to play piano. And for the Criterion Collection, she did an interview where she said that she learned piano when she was a child, but she didn't really keep it up. So she obviously had to sort of relearn it for the film. But it seems like part of her process is just thinking very deeply about the character and sort of letting herself enter this character. And I would also say she's very much of a minimalist with her acting. That something she's known for is not a lot of expression, is not gesticulating and being very demonstrative. She's known for what she withholds. She's known for I don't know what the word would be, but just the lack of emotion sometimes in her, and the way she can be cold and icy and not show a lot of emotion. But often it's not that she's not showing emotion. I wouldn't say that. It's the way that she conveys emotion. And I think this is what makes her so great. She's not doing it through really big, loud gestures. Think of the early silent films, the way acting was back then. People were so extreme because they didn't have words, and they were trying to convey things easily so that the audience could understand it. So you have very exaggerated facial expressions and all of this. Isabel's the complete opposite of that kind of acting that's very demonstrative. This is acting that's much more interior. That's what I would say that Isabelle is doing, is that she's sort of mining the interiority of a character, and she's conveying that character not really through big actions or anything like that, but through subtle gestures or her eyes or her face in very subtle ways that you don't always catch. So her acting is minimal, but it's very powerful, because I think in everyday life, I think her acting is much more true to everyday life, that when we're out in public, when we're around people, we don't tend to be really outspoken or very expressive with our emotions, that we tend to keep things inside, and we might not express those things until we're in a private moment. And or sometimes you don't react to intense situations the way that you think you would. That times when you think you would cry, you don't cry. And then times when you think you wouldn't cry, you do cry. And I think Huppert's performances sort of tap into that, of the erratic nature of emotion, the erratic nature of human beings and the way we express ourselves, that it doesn't always follow a formula. And so I think her acting has a lot of moments of revelation because of that. That she can tap into a character in a very deep way and show us something that we haven't seen before, we haven't felt before. And my introduction to Isabelle Huppert was The Piano Teacher. I had not seen her in anything else up to then. Now, since then, I've seen many of her films, from Elle to Amour to Ma Mère, which she's in with Louis Garrel. That's another very sexually intense film. What else have I seen? I've seen her film that she was in where she played a Bronte sister. I've seen Story of Women. She worked with Claude Chabrol several times. La Cérémonie, which is one of my favorite films, and I did an episode about it. She's really good in La Cérémonie. That's another film where she does things that you wouldn't expect. That's one of her greatest performances, I think, for sure. But yeah, Isabelle's just a treasure, right? Maybe everybody doesn't love her, but I surely love her, and I think she's a really great actress. But I do think that her towering achievement is The Piano Teacher, and what she does in this film. And I chose this film this week for a particular reason, because I talked about Yasujiro Ozu's Late Spring last week, or in the previous episode. And that film is about a father and daughter who are very close, and the father is a widower, and the daughter's played by Setsuko Hara. It's a film from 1949, and it's set in Japan, obviously, by Ozu. But if you're not familiar with it, that's where it's set. Setsuko Hara plays a girl named Noriko, and she's 27 years old. And it's time that she should be getting married and leaving her father, who lives alone, who would be alone without her. She lives with him at that time, and they're very close. And they have a deep and loving connection with each other. And she doesn't want to leave. She doesn't want to get married. She wants to stay with her father and take care of him and have a life with him. But he refuses to let her do that. He lies and pretends that he's going to get remarried so that she will get married and have a life with a husband, a life of her own separate from him. And I talked a lot about this film and why it moved me so much. But I thought that choosing The Piano Teacher for my next episode after that one, because I do think about sometimes how these episodes interact with each other, even though listeners may not pick up on the themes or connections, but I do. I was thinking about how The Piano Teacher is very much a counterpoint to Late Spring, that it's I'm not saying that both are similar in any way, but in The Piano Teacher, we have a relationship between a mother and a daughter. So we have another parental relationship as we did in Late Spring. But what we have is what happens when the daughter doesn't leave, when she lives with the parent, and what can happen and what can come of that. And that sometimes it can be very ugly. Now, in my episode on Late Spring, I talked about how close I am to my mom and how I've chosen to live with her and to stay with her, even though I'm 28 years old. And I'm not interested in getting married and dating and having some kind of separate life from her, that my life is with her. And that's the decision that I've made. I have a really close relationship with my mom. My relationship with my mom is nothing like Erica's relationship with her mother in The Piano Teacher. But at the same time, this film is a portrait of two women who almost have this toxic codependency. Two women who are wounded, I think, in some way, and there's some kind of trauma or damage there. But these two women cannot separate themselves from each other, and they end up almost destroying each other at times. Can you be too close to a parent? I think it raises that question of what happens when you can't separate yourself from a parent. What are the consequences of that, you know? And so I just thought it was an interesting counterpoint to Late Spring because, what if Noriko had stayed with her father? Would it have become toxic? Would it have become violent and hurtful the way that it has become with Erica and her mother? Because Erica's in her 40s, and she's what many people would term a spinster or an old maid. She's a woman who teaches piano to other students and who has repressed her sexual desires and urges, and who has very masochistic, violent desires and fantasies. But she's a woman who has repressed that for so long. And her relationship with her mother is very disturbing, and it's very central to this film. It's about these two women who are really sort of locked in this relationship, and how do I just talk about this? It's like it's just the two of them in that apartment in that film. And like what happens in that world when there's only two people, and how intense that can get and how toxic that can get at times. Erica is repressed, obviously, very sexually repressed, but she's infantile in many ways. It's like she never grew up, but she's always trying to control her emotions. There is this little girl aspect to her, this innocent aspect to her, and yet there's this very dirty, disturbing, perverse, sadistic side of her, self-destructive side of her. And when I saw Isabelle Huppert in this film, it was like a revelation. Like, I could not believe what she had done, what she had put in this film. The heart, the soul. I think it's a brave performance. I think it's blistering. I think it's bold. I think it's brazen. All the B's, breathtaking. I think it is one of the greatest performances of all time because of what she put into that role and what she accessed through it. Because I think it would be very easy to see Erica as weird and strange and so different from us that we could never find anything in her that's redeemable or that's connected to us. And I think the very opposite happens. I think when I watched The Piano Teacher, I saw much more of myself in Erica than I would ever care to admit. I mean, no, I'm not doing anything that Erica did, but Isabelle Huppert brings out certain things about Erica that I think are very relatable, like her vulnerability, her fear of intimacy, her fear of losing herself in a relationship or in sex. And this episode is going to be graphic and it's going to be sexual because I have to. I mean, that's what the film's about. But I'm the last person that should be talking about this stuff. I swear to you, I'm not a sex therapist, okay? There's like all of them out there now. I can't think of any of them. Yeah, I'm not who you go to for sex advice, okay? I don't know anything about this stuff. But I want to talk about it. And I have to because it's in the film. So just be warned that I'm sorry, but I have to go there. I mean, for me, Huppert is really playing a woman who's trying to obliterate herself. I think at every turn she's trying to obliterate herself. And that's what she succeeds in at the end. But what are the things that created Erica? We don't know her backstory, but we have some clues. And so the world that created Erica is the world that also destroyed her. This world of like the upper echelon, these very intellectual, refined, this rich world, right? Of piano recitals, and this world that requires extreme discipline and extreme repression and expects perfection from piano players, pianists, right? And how could Erica really be herself in that environment, I wonder? And I don't know the full role of her mother, but her mother is very possessive and very controlling. And Erica is not able to resist that, and she's not able to free herself of that. So these women, I think, have a very toxic, codependent relationship. But Erica is also, I think, destroyed by men. And I'm going to talk a lot about the gender relations in this film and how I think this film is looking at gender relations. I think it is looking at the way sex plays out for men and women in very different ways, and what happens when a woman tries to be dominant, a woman tries to have some form of control in that sexual interaction. How is she punished? How is she punished? I mean, that's really the key, I think. How is she disrespected? How is she forced to be submissive rather than dominant? To surrender rather than to seduce. We don't allow women to have power when it comes to sex. We don't want women to have power. And I think Erica is a character that dares to try to have power. And I'll go deeper into that when I get there. But the film opens with Erica coming home late and her mother confronting her about where she's been for 3 hours. So we get immediately, here is a woman in her 40s. Why is her mother interrogating her because she comes home late? Why is she even living with her mother at this age? Her mother starts to rummage through her handbag, and so immediately we get a sense of the relationship between this mother and daughter that will be so central to the film as it unfolds. And Erica starts to pull at her mother's hair. This is a very violent interaction between the two of them. And I think it immediately piques our interest of what is going on here between these two women. Why is this happening? Where is this violence coming from? It's really this violent eruption from Erica when she attacks her mother. Now later, they're crying together and Erica apologizes. And so I think we see how toxic this relationship is, how abnormal it is that she would hit her mother that way and treat her mother that way, and then the mother would just forgive her. And the two of them would sort of go on like nothing had happened, and they hold each other. And her mother says, quote, "That's just how we are. We're a hot-blooded family," unquote. And no, you're not a hot-blooded family. Something's wrong here. Something's very, very wrong here between the two of these women. And it's not right. It's not good for either of them. And Erica and her mother even sleep in bed together. They have twin beds that are right beside each other in the same room. So there's always, for me with Erica, this sense of claustrophobia almost, of this woman who is always being watched, is always being monitored, is always being controlled by her mother. But at the same time, she submits to it because she's in her 40s. She could move out. She could have a different life. But she continues to live with her mother, almost like she can't imagine an alternative. She can't imagine a life where she's not controlled by her mother. And in fact, maybe she needs that control. She needs to be dominated in that way. She doesn't know who she is without it. She has to always be in control of her emotions. And perhaps she feels like her mother is what helps her stay in control. That without her mother's power over her, maybe she could lose some kind of control. Because also the way I see Erica, I see her as a character who is deeply intellectual, who is almost trapped in her intellect, who cannot escape her mind. And she's always in her mind. That is her strength, is that she is very intelligent. And so she denies the emotional part of herself. She's not connected to her emotions. She doesn't seem to be connected to her sexuality or her desire or her body. I think, in fact, she fears those things because sexual desire, sexuality, sexual pleasure, falling in love, those are things that are profoundly destabilizing. Those are things that make us come undone, that unravel us, that are frightening in the way that they disorganize us, and how we feel out of control. And I think Erica is terrified of that. She is terrified of not being in control of herself. And she has to control every situation that she is in. And she has to perform her dominance over other people. Especially her students, obviously, and sometimes even her mother. And that's something of myself that I see in Erica, is that need to stay in control and that fear of things that make her feel out of control. That fear of things. Yeah, that fear of people. I think it's a fear of people as well. And I have that. Like, I feel very terrified of not being in control of myself or my emotions. And I feel very terrified of being hurt or taken advantage of by people. And it's something that I really struggle with. Like, I don't really like to be vulnerable with people. I don't really like to interact with people. I think it's also why I don't have any kind of interest in romance or anything like that. Like, I don't date. I'm not interested in marriage. And that's something that I talked about in my episode on Late Spring. And I think part of that comes from this fear of being hurt by someone, by letting somebody in and being hurt by them or being abandoned by them, or letting someone see that part of me and letting someone make me a mess or letting someone make me lose control. I think that really scares me and frightens me. And I think it's the same with Erica. I really do. And so that's a part of Erica that I found really interesting and compelling, because I myself have always defined myself in terms of my intellect and always saw myself as a very intellectual person and always felt very disconnected from my body and things like that, and always feared being out of control. I don't even drink. I don't drink alcohol because I am terrified of being out of control. You know, other people do drugs or they do marijuana or they drink alcohol. I don't do any of that because I'm terrified of being out of control and not having dominance, I guess, over myself. But at the same time, I would say I'm very different from Erica because I am very emotional. That even though I think for a long time, especially when I was younger, I always made straight A's. I was always like this high achiever. when I was in school. And it was the same thing when I was in college. I mean, I graduated with honors. And I didn't really try, though. So I'm very different from Erica. I was not disciplined. When I was in school, I got straight A's really without even having to try very much at it. I was just a curious person. I loved learning. I loved school. I loved writing. I craved knowledge always, and I still do. But I think for a long time I did define myself in terms of my intellect, because that became so much of my identity. It was that, I was a straight A student. I was really smart. I wasn't pretty. I'm still not pretty. I wasn't attractive like most girls are supposed to be, right? As women, we're supposed to be desirable and beautiful, and we're not really supposed to be smart. We're not supposed to be anything except these sort of sexual objects for men. Well, I was never like that. I never felt like that. I never got male attention. All that I really had was my intellect and my mind. And that was how I defined myself, that, I don't have prettiness, and I'm not funny, and I'm not, beautiful and all that, but I'm smart, but I think over the last few years, I've gotten much more in touch with my emotions, and I've become a very emotional person. And that's something that I think comes through in the podcast, that I'm trying to talk about feelings and emotions. And I don't know if I was always that way. I was someone who was much more intellectual. But I think I'm starting to discover or to embrace the more emotional part of myself. Of course, Erica cannot do that. Erica is not emotional. She's terrified of her emotions, and she's terrified of losing control of those emotions. And the way that I think she stays in control and dominant is through the way that she treats other people. And that comes through when she is teaching her students. And I even noticed that when she was in the piano teacher mode with her students, her voice was deeper. I think Isabelle Huppert maybe did that. But if you watch the film, it seems like her voice is much deeper when she is tutoring her students. I guess it's a way for her to have that power and that control. And she's extremely critical of her students. She rarely praises them. She only criticizes them. So Erica is this very in-control, disciplined, rigorous person. And her world is really, I think, turned upside down and undone by the introduction of a very important character in this film, who is Walter Klemmer. And Walter is played by Benoit Magimel, and he's very attractive in this film. He is athletically built, blonde hair, beautifully chiseled face. He's a very good-looking man. You can't deny it. He's gorgeous, really. I don't think I've seen him in any other film. I think he might have been in Little White Lies. That's a French film that Marion Cotillard stars in. I think he was in that film. But he's mainly known for The Piano Teacher, right? And he's very beautiful in this film, and I think Erica is... at first she's very wary of him, and his entrance into her life is very destabilizing, because that's what happens with love and sexual desire. It completely can upend our lives and upend our world, especially for someone like Erica, who is always battling to keep control over her emotions. Walter is sort of immediately infatuated with Erica, and he's very turned on. He meets her at a recital where she's playing piano. They both share an interest in Schubert, who was a composer. I don't know a lot about classical music personally, but the two of them are interested in the same composers. Walter, even though he's young, I would say he's about 20, 21. Maybe he was older, I don't know, but he looks very young. He's much more knowledgeable about classical music than most people his age. And he strikes up a conversation with Erica, and he's drawn to her. And the whole time I watched this film, especially the second time I was watching it, what interested me more the second time than the first time, I think, was, what does Walter get out of this? Why is Walter so consumed by her, even when he knows how dark her fantasies are and dark her desires are? He continues to engage with her. And maybe there's something wrong with him too, like that he keeps pursuing her. But obviously, his own darkness comes out at the end of this film. And so they do have a lot in common, the two of them. And when she's talking to Walter, something very interesting comes out about her life, and that is that her father died in an asylum. And she sort of just says it offhandedly. It's not some big revelation. But I think I missed that the first time that I watched it. And so when I saw it this time, and Erica just, casually mentions that her father died in an asylum, I thought, well, that's very interesting. And that could have some kind of, obviously that had an impact on Erica in some way. And at that same recital, Walter also performs, and he was going to perform another song by another composer, but after he talks to Erica and they're talking about their mutual love of Schubert, he plays Schubert. And it's almost like he's trying to seduce her through this music. And so he is immediately pursuing her. He is immediately interested in her. Erica at that recital is really watching him play, and I love the close-ups in this film. I love how something's happening, but we're not really watching what's happening. Haneke shows us Erica. He shows us Erica watching things. Isabelle Huppert watching things in particular. And as she's watching Walter play this music, I was really reminded of the fragility of Huppert's performance. That Erica's brutality and her violence are often hidden. And like so many women, Erica hides those darker parts of herself. But there's this light in her eyes. Like there's something flickering in her eyes, like this flame. And so Erica, for me, is always a character who seems calm, and she seems disciplined, and she seems like she has it all together, but she's really seething underneath. And so I think there is a fire somewhere in her, and some of those flames can be seen in her eyes, I think, and in the way Isabelle Huppert plays her. And so obviously I have to talk about some of Erica's sexual proclivities, right? I still remember this scene so viscerally when I first saw it, because this is a deeply sexual film, and it's really hard to do sex in film. It's just very difficult to get to the nuances of sex and sexuality in a film. It's so rarely done well, I think, without it becoming pornography or without it becoming exploitative. But I do think the piano teacher looks at sex in a compelling way, I would say. And so it's so crazy to see Erica, this very modest, refined woman, right? To in this film see her, because up to this point we know nothing about really Erica's sexual interests. This is the first time in the film that she is showing that, or that it's being revealed to us. And she goes into a porn store. That's the only way I can describe it. I don't know what the term is for these stores, but it's like a porn place. There's magazines, there's booths where people watch porn, and she goes into one of these booths and she's watching a woman giving a blowjob to a man. And I have to say these things. I'm sorry. Cover your ears. Please cover your ears. I feel weird. I feel like I'm your grandmother talking about sex with you. I know you don't think of me this way at all. But her face is so animated. I think it's the most animated it's ever been when she's watching this porn. And so through her face, Isabelle Huppert says so much about this character. You know, when she's watching Walter play piano, she's trying to hide her emotions. But when she's in the darkness and in the privacy of this porn booth, away from her mother, away from everybody, her face is much more animated. And I don't think she's quite as afraid to show her emotions and her arousal and her excitement. And when she's in this booth, and I still remember this, she picks up a wad of tissue that's in there and just inhales it. She inhales this tissue. Like, this smell is just the best thing she's ever smelled. I still remember this scene. Like, I could not believe it, because you know what's on that tissue. You know. But watching this film for the second time, I mean, this could be my third time, I don't know. But I don't purposely put myself through a film like this. I would say a similar film that comes to mind that is just sort of agonizing to watch would be L.M. Klimov's Come and See. And I have an episode about that film. And it's about war and violence. But this is about a much more sort of private violence, I think, sort of an interior violence, a violence of the soul, right? The violence we can inflict on each other in very, like, personal ways, the way Erica does. But I think what struck me about this scene when she's watching the porn and smelling the tissue, it's so abject. It's so gross to pick up someone's tissue like that they've used. What struck me was her loneliness. Yeah. And how she can't touch a person, so she has to touch this tissue. That the tissue is a proxy for a person. That the tissue contains probably seminal fluid. And instead of being with a man and being able to touch that and have that, she can only have this tissue, that the tissue is like a substitute or a stand-in for real intimacy and real sex that she can't engage in, that she can only watch voyeuristically or secondhand through an old tissue on the floor. Her everyday life is so devoid of love and connection. And what she does in this porn store is so obviously different from her everyday life of piano recitals and stuffy interactions with the elite people of the fine arts. This is such a different world, and yet she almost feels more at home in the porn booth than she does at the piano recital. Like, she almost seems more animated and more alive while she's doing this. So I think for Erica, even though she's repressed in a lot of ways, I think she's also a woman for whom sex and her sexuality and her desire, she deeply feels it. Like, she is deeply obsessed with sex. And we see this later on in the film when she brings out a box that has all kinds of ropes and chains in it. This is a woman who has a very rich, imaginative, intense fantasy life. That there is this other part of her sexuality, that is a huge part of her, and that she doesn't know how to express, and that she hasn't found a channel to express it. Because she doesn't feel safe expressing it. She doesn't feel safe telling anyone her dark desires, right? And she thinks with Walter that she has found that person. But this is a woman for whom sex is actually very important. And her sexuality is sort of a cornerstone of who she is. It's a huge, huge part of her. It's a secret part of her. It's a hidden and repressed part of her, but it's a huge part of her. And Walter auditions to be in her class, and Isabelle Huppert talked about this scene in her interview, and I think Haneke did too in his Criterion interview. But this scene where Walter is auditioning is really the scene that she sort of falls in love with him. That the whole time she's sort of trying to resist it. She's listening to him play the piano again. And I can't remember if he's playing Schubert. He might be. But he's auditioning to get into her class or to get into this academy, and he will be her student as a result. And she wants, I think, to reject him, but as he starts to play, and it's all in Isabelle Huppert's face, that is the moment, I think, when she realizes what she feels for him and her emotions for him. And so there's another scene, and I have to talk about these scenes, but this was also a very intense scene to watch, where she's in the bathroom and she is cutting her genitals. They don't fully show it. She's just sitting on the rim of the tub and the blood starts to drip down. It's not clear if she's using a razor blade, but I don't know if she's cutting the vagina or the labia or what she is doing exactly. But she is inflicting harm on herself. She is a cutter. She is someone who does harm to her own body, which I think fits this character very well. But I think she's a woman filled with rage. Like, I also get that about Erica, that she is, first of all, deeply alone. I don't know if I've seen loneliness depicted in quite this way on film. That this is a woman profoundly alone, who cannot feel connection to others, and cannot feel love for others. And I do wonder what happened to her to make her like that. But at the same time, I wonder what happened to me. Because, again, this is a part of Erica that I relate to, is my complete inability to connect with other people, and the complete absence of love in my life except for my relationship with my mom, because we're very close. But I have nobody else. It's that she is my primary emotional support, and she's really all I have. And so again, I'm not as extreme as Erica. I'm not self-harming. I don't do stuff like that. I certainly don't go to porn shops, I promise you. But I can relate to the loneliness of her, that she can't connect. She can't be intimate. She can't give herself to that. She's too terrified. And she can't feel love for other people. She does not love Walter. I don't believe that. And I certainly don't believe Walter loves her. I don't think either of these two people are capable of love at all. But I get the loneliness, and I also get the fury of Erica of, look what my life is. You know, this is not the way my life was supposed to go. I have the sense about Erica that she wasn't really supposed to be a piano teacher. She was probably supposed to be some great pianist, right? Playing, Carnegie Hall or something. I don't know what a pianist does. I don't know like what's considered the big moment for a pianist. But maybe she was supposed to be great, and instead she's teaching like these kids. She's teaching like teenagers and stuff. Is this really where she wanted her life to go, or what she wanted it to be? I don't have the sense that she does. And she's living with her mom, and she doesn't have a lot going on in her life. She's going to porn shops, What has her life turned out to be? It's certainly probably not what she dreamed of when she was a teenage girl. So I think there's a fury in Erica, possibly about what her life has become and the things that have happened to her and that have been done to her, especially over the course of this film. So she's this person who's just seething, as I said before, that there is this this bonfire or something, this conflagration in her body that is going to eat her alive, that is going to consume her and kill her because she cannot escape it. She's deeply, deeply wounded, and there is a pain and a damage in her that I also relate to. That when traumatic things happen in your life, they become part of your body and they take over your body and your mind. And I see that in Erica. I see that fragility. I see that loneliness. I see that pain. I see that aching. There's like an aching in Erica, right? She's aching for someone who will accept her and understand her for all that she is, with all like the very deep, disturbing parts of her. And I think maybe she thinks that's Walter, or that Walter can do that. I don't know why she thinks Walter's capable of that. I think it's clear from the beginning Walter can't do that. Walter's pathetic. I can't stand Walter. I'm just going to be honest. It was interesting because in that Criterion interview, Michael Haneke said that in the book, The Piano Teacher by Elfriede Jelinek, Walter is just an asshole. And that in the film, he didn't want him to be an asshole. But he comes off like an asshole. But that scene of her cutting herself with a razor blade, you get the depths of this woman's pain and how much she hates herself. She truly hates herself. I can relate to that too. I hate myself, and I've always struggled with that my entire life. This woman has a lot of layers. That's the thing about Erica. You obviously may not relate to her going to porn shops and sniffing tissues and, attacking her mother violently. There are parts of her that are so odious and abhorrent and atrocious, right? Just these terrible, terrible parts of Erica. But then there are these much more tender parts of her. That aching, that loneliness, that fury, that emptiness. There's almost something very empty about her at times, I think. She often berates her students, and at one of those porn stores, she sees one of her students, her male students, and later on the next day or a few days later, they're doing a lesson, and she really berates him, and she's mad at him for looking at porn, and she says something about men. I didn't write the full quote down, but I got the sense that she distrusts men very much. And that there's maybe even a hatred there a little bit. And she doesn't trust men. Another thing I relate to about Erica. And she's sort of right not to trust men. Or to not trust Walter in particular. Yeah. She follows Walter after practice one day. He tells her because he becomes her student, and he confesses his obsession and love for her. He says that he can't stop thinking about her, and she follows him to the ice rink where he plays hockey, and that'll be a very important setting later on in the film. And again, I come back to the contradictions of Erica. She's intense, but she's also so infantile, like I said earlier. And it shows up in these scenes throughout the film where her mom always has to call her and know where she is. And before one rehearsal, Erica is just pleading with her not to call because it makes her look like a little girl. And so she's so infantile in that way, even though she's in her 40s. But Isabelle Huppert just beautifully inhabits those contradictions, that she can be so brutal and dominant, and then against her students who are children, and then she can almost resemble her students and resemble a teenager, resemble a child, because she herself is always monitored by her mother, and she can't escape it, And in another really graphic scene about sex, she goes to a drive-in movie theater, and she watches a couple in their car having sex. And it's such an intense experience for her. I mean, you would think with Erica that maybe her emotional or transcendent experiences would come through playing the piano, playing Schubert or whatever. And instead, her really intense, emotional, revelatory moments come through sex. Whether it's watching the porn video or it's watching these two people have sex in their car, she just squats down beside the car and pees right there. And there are tears coming down her eyes as she listens to them moaning in the car. And her tears are just pouring down. She can only watch these things. She can never participate in them. And the man in the car does see her, and he confronts her, and she runs away. It's this very intense scene. Like, as it was happening, I could not believe what I was watching. That's my whole experience with this film. I can't believe what I'm watching. Like, I couldn't believe that this was put on the screen. I can't believe that Haneke did this. I can't believe that Isabelle Huppert did this, that she had the bravery and the guts to put this kind of character on the screen, to do these things, to completely open herself up in this way. It's brutal. It's just so brutal. Ugh. She bears both her body and her soul, right? Because there is nudity in the film at times. Or like when she's cutting her genitals, even though we don't see that, she's still exposing her body to some extent. But then she also really exposes her soul, and this is such an interior role. Erica doesn't talk a lot. She doesn't say a lot. It's so much more about her body language and her face. Like in the scene where she's watching Walter interact with a female student during a rehearsal. I think her name's Anna. And you can see her surprise and her jealousy. You can see it cross over her face when he's talking to that girl. She can't stand it. And we see the lengths that her violence will go, that she does not just inflict violence on herself. She inflicts it on the people around her, which we kind of already knew when we saw what she did to her mom. But after that rehearsal, she goes to that girl's coat, and first of all, she breaks a glass. She puts it in a scarf, and she steps on it, and that sound of the glass breaking is so visceral for me. Like, when I hear the sound of breaking glass, it's just, I can't handle it. And then she puts those shards into that girl's coat pocket, so that when that girl puts her hand in the pocket, her hand will be shredded. And it is. And we hear the scream when it happens. And you know what Erica's done. You know that she's taken something from this girl. Not just has she inflicted violence on her, she's taken away her ability to play the piano or take part in the show. And later on, Erica will stand in for that girl, or she's going to. It's just such a gruesome scene, not just for the blood, but for the cruelty. I mean, this is the depths of Erica's self-hatred, and it shows us what Erica is capable of and the way she hurts not just herself, but other people. And after that scene, there's another really important scene, which is the bathroom scene. Because Erica flees to the bathroom after the girl, screams and all of that. And Walter follows her, and they start to kiss, but she's almost limp with him. I mean, at times she reciprocates, but most of the time she's very limp and lifeless. And she refuses to surrender to him or to let him have any kind of power over her. And she immediately, after a little while, she immediately takes over and becomes dominant again. She will not let him have intercourse with her. This is a difficult scene, and it goes on for a while. And it's often depicted in the posters for the film. It's that central of a scene where he has her on the floor and they're kissing. And it would almost look like this romantic swoon, right? But it's nothing of the kind. This is not normal love. This is not normal romance. This is two people, like, who don't even know what they're doing, and are sort of toxic for each other, right? It's really not a romantic film at all. This is not a romantic film. This is just a brutal film. It's not about romance. It's not about love. It's just about really broken, wounded people who do not know how to connect or love or be vulnerable or anything. It's a violent film in that way, about the violence we can do to each other in very personal ways. But she will not let him have sex with her. She won't. At first she starts to rub his penis, and then she starts to give him a blowjob, but she refuses to finish. And I'm sorry I have to say these things in these terms, but this is what's happening. I have to describe it to you. She doesn't finish him off, though. She doesn't let him have release. She forces him to show his erection to her while she looks. And what struck me about this scene, watching it again, is that this scene is such a reversal of gender roles. And that's why I think, especially maybe in the second half of the film, I think there's something, we're being shown something about gender relations, I think, when it comes to sex. But this scene in particular is a reversal of gender roles and says something about gender relations, that men are not used to being told what to do in these interactions. They call the shots. Their pleasure is centered. Their gaze is catered to. But Erica is the one gazing in this scene. She's the one telling him what to do. And she is the one withholding and refusing. She is the one maintaining her power. She refuses to abdicate her power. And he goes along with it, but I think the threat of violence is always there in these kinds of interactions. He says at one point that she's hurting him, because he wants to just have sex with her. He wants to just have normal, sex. I guess they would call it vanilla, right? Just normal vanilla sex. He wants to get it over with. And she won't do that. She won't give in to that. And he says that she's hurting him. But really, he could hurt her at any time. He could rape her at any time. They're in a bathroom. Nobody's around. She's very petite. Isabelle Huppert's tiny. She's so small compared to him. She could scream and alert people. But I think the threat of violence is always there, just as it's acted out later in the film. So she has power to a certain extent. She only has power that he allows her to have. Because he could easily just take what he wants. But he doesn't until later. And he says after this encounter that next time will be better. And of course that's sort of, I think, a sign that he'll take control. That he's only letting her have control and power for a little while. But eventually he'll get it back from her. Like a woman can only have what a man allows her to have in sex or in a sexual interaction. That there has to be a give and take, but what if there's only take? What if there's no give? You get what I'm saying? And I think that interaction reveals some of that. That she's playing the part of being in power and being dominant, but how long will he let that continue? And we see near the end, or at the end, that he refuses to let her maintain that power and dominance, that he has to take it back from her. And then we see the very dark side of Walter come out. And during that interaction in the bathroom, that's also when she gives him a list of all her fantasies that she wants to act out. And that's a really important part of the film, is that Erica has never done this before. She's never shared her fantasies with anybody. But she thinks that Walter is the person that she can share that with. And I have to tell you, I still think it's delusional that she ever thought Walter was the person to do this with. He's so unimaginative. He's like so boring and average and normal. There's no way he was ever going to be able to enact her fantasies in any possible way, you know? And she wants to have sex with Walter. I think that's clear, but she refuses to have any kind of closeness or intimacy with him. They don't really connect, and it's not clear why he's attracted to her, but he is. And during one of their practices, he asks why she doesn't let them be closer. And that's also when she gives him the letter that contains her desires and the fantasy of what she wants him to do to her. He wants to go away for a weekend, but she refuses to. She has something that she has to do with her mom. He tells her to let go, to let herself feel emotions. And this is actually an important scene, I think. Nobody talks about it. But this is the scene where I think we learn more about Erica, you know? Because when he tells her that, he tells her, let go, be emotional, feel your emotions, surrender to your emotions. She responds, quote, I have no feelings. Get that into your head. And if I ever do, they won't win out over my intelligence, unquote. That's Erica. That is Erica. She's telling him the brutal truth right in that moment. I have no feelings. She doesn't feel. She doesn't seem to be a person that feels the way other people do. But like she says, even if she does feel, even if she does have emotions, she'll never let them get the best of her. They will never override her intellect. She will always have control over them. She will always have that power over them. They will never have power over her. And that's a big thing for Erica, is to not let her emotions get the best of her or have any kind of control over her. And of course, when you tamp down your emotions and you can't feel for other people, then you can't have love and you can't have connection. So she can never have those things if she refuses to let herself feel anything or have any emotions. She feels nothing. I mean, maybe she feels something for her mother. It's not clear, but it seems much more disturbing what she feels for her mother. I wouldn't say what she feels for her is love. I don't know if I would categorize that as love. What happens between the two of them. It's these two women who are sort of stuck with each other, who are trapped with each other, and they can't get out of the situation, and they're just sort of trapped there together in that apartment, and they resent each other, and the hatred between them festers and boils over and just infects their life, I think. That hatred and that resentment that they feel for each other, that they can't really live with each other, but they really can't live without each other either. And so that's an interesting aspect to it. I think that emotion is what allows us to love, and it allows us to connect. You have to feel things. You have to feel something for another person. You have to feel something for yourself. And if you don't, I think it makes connection very, very hard. And that's why her and Walter will never be in love. They'll never be together. Because she's so inside her mind. This is a woman almost trapped in her mind to the point where she is disconnected from people. And something that I asked myself as I was watching the film was, how can this woman feel Schubert so deeply but not feel any kind of love or tenderness? That she can feel music in this particular way, but she can't feel anything for other people. And that is always the danger, I think, of being so hyper-intellectual, of being so defined by your intellect, that it can disconnect you with other parts of yourself that might be more emotional or might be more out of control, right? And so sometimes you'll have that with certain people, that they might feel art. They might connect to a book or a song or a movie, but that doesn't necessarily make them a more humane person, because they don't have that same intensity of feeling for other people. You get what I'm saying? And that's also a fear that I have, that I feel art that I feel more for art than I feel for people. And I've always felt that way. I just always felt so connected to art, to books and language and cinema and music. And then I don't have that same intensity of emotion for other people. I don't have these very deep, lasting, rich relationships with other people, or this deep connection with other people. I feel more connected to art. And so that's also something I could relate to about Erica, is that she's so within her own mind and intellect that she can't get out of it, and it disconnects her from other people. And that's also something that I struggle with, or that I fear, that I put art above people, that art matters to me more than people do. And so while I have these films and I have these books and things like that, I don't have friendships, I don't have relationships, I don't have the things that you really need in your life that are enriching and important and beautiful. And that's something that scares me. But I do see that in Erica. But at the same time, I do think that in giving Walter this letter of her fantasies and desires, that she's really bearing her soul. As I said earlier, sexuality is deeply important to Erica. Her sexual fantasies and desires are a central part of who she is. It's a very personal, intimate, private part of her that she keeps hidden. And so I think for her to reveal it is really an act of vulnerability and bravery on her part. That she's being vulnerable with another person in a way that she's never been. And that is the only way you can connect to people, is to be vulnerable, to be open, to be in a place where you could be hurt. And that's what she's doing. She's putting herself in that position. She's exposing this part of herself that is deeply important to her and deeply crucial to her identity. And she's laying it all out there for this person. Sex is so much more than sex. And that's what I think some directors can get wrong about it when they try to put it on a film, is that they make it just about sex. Because, of course, they're often coming from the male gaze perspective. They're coming from the male perspective. But sex is more than just this action. It's more than just, what you see in a porn movie that is like so devoid of any kind of emotion. Or, when Erica's watching that film, and we see some of the film, it's like so vulgar in a way. It's just mechanical. It's just this woman doing this motion and this action, and there's nothing more to it. That's what I think makes porn what it is that there's no emotion, there's no anything else to it. It's just this mechanical action that the actors perform. But sex is more than that. Sex is always a terrifying exposure. And especially for Erica, that's what it is. It is an exposure not just in terms of her body, but of her soul and of the desires that she has, and the desires that she's sort of terrified of and that she keeps hidden. But with this particular person, this Walter, she shares all of it, and she's really just cutting herself open, metaphorically. In the bathroom she cut herself physically, but with this action of sharing the letter of her fantasies and desires. She's cutting herself open emotionally, and she's making it so that she can be hurt. She's vulnerable in this act. He was not the person to share that with, not at all. And she definitely realizes that, I think, too late. But for her, this is a profound act of exposure and vulnerability, and he obviously doesn't appreciate how important it is to her. For instance, when he shows up at her house after she's given him the letter, and he follows her home. So interesting, that reversal, how earlier in the film she was following him to his hockey game, and then now he's following her back to her apartment. Both of these are people who engage in very toxic behavior, following one another and all of that. They go into, I think it's Erica's room, and they put a dresser in front of the door so that her mother can't get in, and it's sort of a reenactment of the scene in the bathroom where he embraces her and her body goes limp. She is very passive, and her passivity in these moments is quite striking when you compare them to the way she is at other times in the film when she's very powerful and dominant, especially when she's talking to her students or when she's interacting with anybody. But with Walter, and when he tries to kiss her and when he tries to get close to her, she goes limp. She's almost lifeless. He still hasn't read the letter. This letter is the centerpiece of her life. I mean, this letter is everything to her. The fact that she's written it, that she has shared it with him, it's probably all she can think about, and he's completely uninterested in it. And I think what his disinterest says is that he's not concerned with her desires. Like most men, only his matter. Even now, even in this day and age, look what we're seeing with the Me Too movement. We're seeing women speak up about how men treat them, how men think that they are entitled not just to women's bodies, but to women's time, to women's attention, to everything about women. Men think that they are entitled to it and that it should belong to them, that if they want to touch a woman's breast, if they want to touch a woman's body, if they want to make crude comments, if they want to violate, a woman's body, whatever, if they want to scream at a woman the way Jeffrey Tambor did to Jessica Walter with the whole Arrested Development thing that's come out recently, scream at women, berate women, inappropriately touch women the way Morgan Freeman has been accused of by multiple women, very egregious things and violating things. That's what Me Too is partly about. It's not just that's what it's about. It's about women speaking about this and finally saying that male desire, or what men want, is not the most important thing, that it should not, that male desire should not, I'm not wording it right, it shouldn't be central, because that's what it's about. It's about men wanting something and taking it because they want it. And Me Too is about speaking about that, resisting it, condemning it, And I know Me Too doesn't really fit into a discussion of the piano teacher. It doesn't really fit in very well at all. But for me, Me Too is also about gender relations. It's about what happens between a man and a woman when they're alone, and what is expected of a woman, and what happens during sexual intercourse. Whose desires are prioritized? Who is holding the power in that? We saw that with the Aziz Ansari story that came out, and how the woman who wrote it felt like she couldn't leave. She felt like she was being coerced, and a lot of people attacked her for what she wrote. But if Me Too is going to truly be radical or revolutionary, I think it has to include a spectrum of experiences, from violent rape, obviously, to more subtle interactions between men and women that are not seen as harmful, or they're not noticed in the way that they should be, but nevertheless they need to be brought to the light. And we need to talk about, how do men and women interact with each other? What happens when a man and woman are alone together? What happens within sex between men and women, right? All of this matters. Gender relations matter. The way women's desire is treated matters. And I think what we see in this scene, it's not really connected to Me Too at all. I don't know. I'm not good at talking about this stuff. I feel really uncomfortable. But what I'm trying to say, but I feel a lot when I watch this film, and there's so much that I want to say about it. There's things that I relate to about it, and I think other women possibly relate to it as well. But something that struck me about this scene, where he doesn't even read the letter, he hasn't read it, he doesn't want to read it, is, to me, it's a dismissal of Erica's desire. It's a dismissal of female desire and want, and how so often women are not allowed a space to talk about their desires and their fantasies and what they want. That it's just assumed that they will do whatever the man wants, and that the man's desire is what is central, and that's what matters. That's what we saw in the Aziz Ansari interaction, was that even though she was sending him signals that she was not interested, his desire mattered more than her desire not to engage in sex with him. And that's much more relatable, I think, for a large swath of women than maybe a really violent rape. The more subtle interactions that dismiss women, that marginalize women, that make women feel silenced and make them feel like they don't matter and their desire doesn't matter, that can have profound consequences. And it matters. This conversation matters. And it really bothered me when he wouldn't read the letter. That this was such an exposure for her, and he didn't have the time to care. And he just wants sex. That's what he wants, what's on that porn video, right? He just wants the act. I mean, even, it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it, how in their interactions they almost reenact that porn video. How and there's a scene later on where she's giving him a blowjob. I hate even saying these terms. I feel so, crazy. Ugh. I don't like talking about sex, and yet I end up talking about sex on this podcast way too much. It's interesting how it almost turns into a porn video between them, at least when it comes to what he wants, because all he wants is sex, I mean, he makes these claims that he wants to be close to her, that he loves her, but he doesn't really indicate at any point in the film that he loves or cares about her, or that he has any interest in her desires or wants. It's much more about his pleasure at all times. He wants sex, plain and simple. She wants a fantasy played out, this elaborate fantasy in her mind and that she's written down. She wants an experience. He just wants to fuck. That's the crudest way that I can put it, but that is the way these two are, and the audience can see it so clearly, but she can't. I think that she is keeping him at bay. And I don't know if we're supposed to infer this. I got the sense that she was a virgin. I got the sense that she was not sexually experienced at all. I don't know if other people interpreted it that way or anything like that, but that's the sense I got. I don't know if we're supposed to. But even though I think she's not sexually experienced, I think she knows that as soon as he has her, as soon as they consummate their relationship and she lets him have sex with her, I think she knows that he'll be done with her and on to the next girl or the next woman. And so I think part of why she withholds from him and why she strings him along is because she knows that that withholding gives her a form of power over him. Because as soon as he gets what he wants, he won't want it anymore. Like that really great Hole song, right? What is it? When they get what they want, they never want it again. I can't remember what. I should know what song that's in. But I can't remember. I love that line. I love Hole. So he finally reads the letter. She has to force him, right? And she watches him as he's reading it, and you can just feel the exposure. You can just feel how naked, even though she's fully clothed in this scene, she is completely naked in front of him through this letter. So exposed and vulnerable. And he reads some of it out. She wants to be tied up. She wants to be gagged. Why must I say this? She wants to stick her tongue in his butt. That's what she wants to do. I'm sorry I'm putting you through this. He laughs as he reads it, and he's shocked. And that's when Erica gets out her box of ropes that's hidden under her bed. And I don't even think you have to be into S&M or anything like that to feel something in this scene, because this is a complete exposure for her and what she is doing. And he laughs. He laughs at her. The humiliation of it, right? It's so humiliating. She is bearing her soul to him, and she starts to cry, saying that she's waited for him. She's delusional, really, to think that this man can do anything for her. He's like so mediocre to me. Don't get me wrong, Benoit is gorgeous. He's a very attractive man. But his character in this film is just so ordinary. I don't know why, but she thinks he's the one who can bring her desires out of her mind and into reality. That's what she sees in him. He's almost like her savior in a way. And she's showing her innermost feelings to him. And she wants this violence to be done to her body. And for some unknown reason, personally, I can't understand it. I don't do self-harm. I don't cut myself. I'm not masochistic at all. I fear pain. Like, pain terrifies me. I'm a little whiny baby when I'm in pain. Like, if I get a really bad hangnail, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be around me. I'm a whiny baby when it comes to pain. I hate it. But for her, pain inflicted and violence inflicted on her body becomes some form of pleasure for her. We're not sure why. But that's just who she is. That's what she wants. But I think she has so obviously misjudged this guy. He's not the one. He can't accept what she has revealed to him. He thinks she's sick. He says that she needs treatment. He's completely disgusted and repulsed by her. And I think she knows that she has made a major misstep, that he can't handle it. He's not the person who can handle it. And so after he leaves, she's in bed that night with her mom. And this is another very disturbing scene in this film. The disturbing scenes accumulate throughout the film. It's just this wave after wave of neurosis and perversion. And yet I love it. Like, what does it say about me that I like this film? It just goes there. Like, you have to respect Haneke to some extent. You have to respect any director and any actress too, who would go to this place, that's going to take you places that you have never been as you watch a film. It's sort of breathtaking where they went and that they ever did it and that it ever got funded and that it ever got distributed. It is insane that this film ever happened, right? Like, I still can't believe it. But she's in bed that night with her mother, because they sleep beside each other in the same room. Her mother is like furious at her. She's basically calling her a slut and a whore. She thinks that when Erica was alone with Walter in the room that they had sex, And then all of a sudden Erica jumps on her mother and she starts kissing her. She says she loves her. She holds her mother down as though she wants to rape her. And then Erica starts to sob and she gets off her mother. Her mother's calling her crazy, saying she's out of her mind. We do not know the source of Erica's pain, but in this scene, that pain is so clear that something has happened to her. She has been deeply traumatized and wounded by something in her life. Because she has gone over the edge. That was so outrageous. Inappropriate isn't even the word, right? To try to have sex with your mother, and then all of a sudden she raises her mother's nightgown up and looks at her genitals, and oh my God, I'm just like, what? There's no vocabulary for this film, right? There isn't. How do you even talk about this? How do you interpret it? What I like about Haneke, and I think he said this in some interview, he wants people to be open to these interpretations. He wants people to watch his films and get whatever they get from it, and he feels that any interpretation is valid, and if he disagrees with your interpretation, that's also valid, that it's all valid to some extent, whatever you get from it. I think that Isabelle, perhaps the only person that she does feel any kind of love or tenderness or connection with is her mother, and that somehow that love has gotten eroticized for her in some way. Or she feels like the kind of person Erica does, who has to push the limits, that the only way she feels alive is when she is doing something so extreme, like smelling, a tissue in a porn booth, or watching people have sex in their car, or cutting herself in the genitalia. It's like she has to live these extreme experiences in order for her to feel something, in order for her to feel alive in some way. She has to flirt with danger. I guess that would be the word, that she has to push the limits and push the limits until there is no limit, and then go beyond the limit of what is decent and what is moral and what is acceptable. She has to hurt herself, and she has to hurt other people, because maybe only through pain can she feel anything, because she doesn't seem to feel anything at other times. She needs that pain, I guess, to feel alive, or to remind her that she's alive. I don't know. Erica is such a brutal character, but she's also very mysterious. We don't totally understand her. Maybe we're not supposed to. That's not the point. You're not supposed to understand Erica. You're just supposed to maybe watch her and try to just accept what you're seeing, come to terms with it in some way. That I bet there are women like this. I would imagine there could be. I mean, the book itself is written by a woman, and she takes from her own experience. So, but of course, Haneke manipulates it and takes what he wants from the book and shapes it the way he wants to. I mean, we're getting a very male perspective on all of this, but I still think Isabelle Huppert keeps it grounded and authentic. And I do think she brings something very powerful to that role. And the thing about near the end of this film is that it is one sort of horrific scene after another. That's why I have to talk about all of them. It's just one after another. It's like, she tries to rape her mother, and then she shows up at Walter's hockey practice. They go into a room at the ice rink, and now Erica has made this complete reversal. Whereas before she was dominant, she was powerful, she was not going to give in to what he wanted and his desires. She was, in a way, putting her own desire first before him. Now that she's been rejected by him, she completely changes. She says she'll never write a letter like that again. She only cares about what he wants. She becomes desperate. And that's something that's sort of shocking to see in Erica, that desperation for him. Although I guess you could argue there were other moments of desperation. She says that she'll be normal. She's so hungry for whatever he has to give, I guess, for his love and attention. She's willing to do anything for it. And they try to have sex. She tries to give him a blowjob. But she starts to vomit. She's not able to finish. She vomits. So it's this very abject scene. It's like his pants are down. She's vomiting. She cleans her mouth out. And it's so weird. It's like I could almost imagine the smell of the vomit in the room. Like, that's the kind of scene that this is. And this is the scene that I was talking about earlier that lasted like 7 or 8 minutes. And it was a continuous shot. So from the moment she gets to the hockey rink and he sees her, to the moment they're back there doing this scene, there is no cutting. There is no editing. The scene was done in one take. It had to be done that way. So if something messed up or there was an error, the actors had to start over again and do the scene. And it's just it's an astonishing scene, everything that happens. But it's like you could smell the vomit in the room. That's how visceral this film gets at times, where you almost feel like you're there. It's that raw. I mean, that's what Isabelle Huppert does. She just puts it out there. Like, she's so brave and fearless in this role. You know, at times she's this very vulnerable woman with tears in her eyes. She had tears in her eyes when he was reading that letter, and she had tears in her eyes when she was listening to him play Schubert. And so there's these deep moments of intense emotion that come through her face. And then there's moments of violence and fury, like when she's attacking her mother and trying to have sex with her mother. And then there's scenes like this where she's so desperate and so abject and vomiting. And I think I'll always be haunted by how after this scene, because he treats her like dirt. I don't care what you feel about Erica. He treats her like shit. And it pisses me off. It really does. It's just gross the way that he treated her in that scene. The way he treats her throughout the film, I think, is gross. Men are gross. But after this scene, it got this terrible scene of humiliation. Oh my God, I can feel it. I feel the humiliation of it, I think. It's like she runs out into the skating rink and nobody's on it. Just this one girl who's ice skating. And you just see Erica. And it's the way Isabelle's walking. It's like, again, this is an actress who, she acts with her whole body and soul. That's what I say about Isabelle Huppert. It's in her face, it's in her body, it's in the way she walks, it's in her eyes. This character almost possesses her and like uses her as a conduit, right? Like Isabelle is just the body that the character possesses. But she's walking out into the skating rink and she's just blurring into the whiteness. And there's something so heartbreaking about it. Of every scene in this film, and so many you'll see different pictures from the film online, people who take screenshots. But for me, this is one of the most powerful, of her body just disappearing and blurring into the whiteness of the ice skating rink. I think something dies in her. Yeah. Or something has started to die in her with that moment of that scene of humiliation, of what she had exposed, what she had shown him, and he had just smashed it and dismissed it and laughed at it and just ruined her. I think he so humiliated her that she had taken this massive step to trust him, to write the letter. I'm not saying Erica is some kind of like heroine or that I look up to her. I'm not saying that, but my God, what Isabelle Huppert and Haneke do is they take this character who is so irredeemable in so many ways, so horrific and violent and destructive, and they find the humanity of her, and it's there, and you see it, and you feel it, and you don't expect to. You may have nothing in common with this character, but there is a pain when you watch her go into that whiteness. You can tell this is someone who is starting to dwindle, starting to diminish, that something has happened to this woman, that something started happening to her probably from the time she was a child, that something has been slowly killing her. And she has been slowly killing herself. But you don't know exactly what the root of it is. Maybe you don't need to know. It reminds me a bit of Abbas Kiarostami's film Taste of Cherry, where it's about this man in Iran, that's where it's set, driving around trying to find someone who will bury him after he commits suicide. You never know why he wants to commit suicide. You have no idea. And that's the strength of the film for me, is that it keeps that mystery there. You don't need to know, but you can relate to it in some way. You can relate to that despair, that hopelessness that the main character has. So there's something similar going on here in this film, The Piano Teacher. You have no idea why Erica is the way she is. You don't. Haneke, in an interview with Criterion, he said that he did have a mother-daughter in the film as sort of a parallel to Isabelle and her mother. It's the young girl Anna, the one that Erica put the glass in the pocket, because that girl was a teenager and she was a piano student, and her mother is very hard on her and wants her to do very well. So there may be a little bit of a hint in that relationship that perhaps from a very young age there was a lot expected from Erica, and she was terrified to fail, and terrified not to be perfect, and terrified not to be disciplined and in control of herself. And maybe some of it comes from that. We don't know exactly. But God, that scene at the hockey place, I'm just like, oh, that hits me hard, that scene. I don't know why. It's so humiliating. It's so humiliating. It's so hard to see this woman who just a few scenes before was in complete control and was dominant when they were in the bathroom together. And she withheld, and she refused to give in to him on his terms. She wanted to do it on her terms. She was adamant about that. And then to see her in this scene where she is completely helpless, powerless. It's really sad. She's desperate, And then this is a really hard scene, the next one, to watch. It's just scene after scene that's hard to watch. That's what this film is. I'm sort of shocked that I chose to talk about it, but I think I had to talk about it. How can you not talk about this film? It's insane. It's insane not to talk about it. Like, I have to do it. But Walter shows up at her home, and this is the scene of the rape. And this is just, This was, if I'm remembering right, this was another sort of long shot, or had a few long shots in it. Walter shows up, he locks her mother away, and he attacks Erica, and he claims to be acting out her fantasies. Remember in her letter she talked about wanting to be tied up and gagged, and there was also in the letter something about her mother being in the next room or something. So he claims in his violent outbursts to just be enacting her fantasies, that's all it is. But this is something very different. This is not a controlled environment with two adults who are consenting and who are willingly participating in a sexual experience or a sexual act. This is really an eruption of male violence. He hits Erica very hard to the point where she's bleeding. Her nose is bleeding. Blood is like everywhere. Her mother's screaming and terrified. But the whole point of it is not to enact her fantasies. The point of it is that he finally gets what he wants and how he wants it. The thing that he wanted in the bathroom that day, and that she wouldn't give to him. And he was bound and determined that he was going to get it from her no matter what. And if she didn't give it willingly, he was going to take it from her. And that's what he does with Erica on the ground, limp, as he rapes her. So this has nothing to do with enacting her sadomasochistic desires or fantasies, because he made very clear he wasn't interested in them. This is about him getting what he wanted the whole time. And he gets it by raping her. And it is a horrific scene to watch. This film is not for the faint of heart, that is for sure. I still don't know how I've watched it twice. I may have watched it 3 times. I don't know. It is so brutal to watch that. And Isabelle just, I don't know how she did it. And of course he blames her for the whole thing. He says she humiliated him, that she led him on. It's every excuse in the book under, patriarchy and misogyny. Every excuse in the book. You did this to me. You caused it. This is your fault. Again, I think this is a film at times about gender relations, and other people may have very different interpretations from me. I do not claim to be heavily knowledgeable about feminist theory or anything like that, though I do consider myself a feminist, and I do care about social issues and social justice, and I care about race, gender, class, things like that. It doesn't come up in every single film that I talk about. It's not my sole focus when I'm talking about a film. But for me, watching this, I just felt like, I'm not saying Haneke was purposefully saying something about gender relations, but I think it's there. I think this is a look at male violence, at misogyny, at all of that. And I think you see it in some of these scenes, that he wanted to punish her for not giving him what he wanted, or not giving it to him the way he wanted her to. So he was going to take it no matter what. And that's what he did. And so, of course, now I have to talk about the ending. I know this episode has gotten long. The ending. I don't even know how to talk about it. It was so shocking the first time I saw it. And what's interesting, or what's really surprising, I think. I say interesting too much, I know. What's surprising is that watching the film, the ending still retains its power to shock you. That it's still just, oh my God. What I got from this scene, or what I saw in it that I didn't see the first time, was some of the parallels to The Passion of Joan of Arc by Carl Theodor Dreyer. And I have an episode where I talk about that film. It's based on a lot of close-ups. It's composed of a lot of close-ups of Falconetti. And when Isabelle Huppert, right before she stabs that knife into her chest, there is this look on her face that, I don't know, I still can't even put it into words, but it reminded me of seeing Falconetti in The Passion of Joan of Arc, like this anguish in her face, but also almost this beauty, or this light, or this like, I don't know, I can't put it into words, I wish I could, like this mystical thing in her eyes. It's breathtaking, like it's unspeakable when Isabelle does that. And then she like bares her teeth and she just makes this twisted look on her face. Oh God, this scene. You know, everyone's gone. Walter has just passed her and smiling. The night before he raped her, just the day before this recital, or maybe it's a few days, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know the timeline, but at some point, you know, he had just raped her, and he walks by her smiling. Says that he can't wait to hear her because she's taken the place of Anna, the girl who put her hand in the broken glass. She's taken her place at like a show or a recital or whatever. It's like a student thing. And he walks past her saying that and smiling with his friends. It's horrific. And everybody's gone out of the lobby. She's in the lobby, remember? She's completely alone, and she takes the knife out of her bag that she had packed. She packed the knife in there. Now, of course, when she put that knife in her bag, we thought it was maybe intended for Walter, right? I always did. I never thought that she would stab herself, although it's so obvious now, right? I mean, the whole film she has inflicted violence on herself, so of course the ending would be like this. But you thought maybe it was for Walter. You know, she was so mad and wanted that revenge for him raping her. And it's interesting to note that just, you know, the last year or so she was in Elle, which is about a woman who's raped and who seeks revenge against her rapist. And so it's sort of interesting to think about the parallels between that a little bit. But that's what you think when you see the knife, is that it's intended for Walter. But of course it's intended for her. And just that, her face before she stabs herself, it's just almost transcendent. Like, I don't even know how to put it into words. Like, she has realized something, or I don't know. That will go down in history as like one of the most powerful scenes ever. And of course her performance is one of the greatest ever, but her face right before she stabs herself, I can't even put it into words. As you can tell, I'm struggling. And she just does one stab, and it's so sudden and unexpected. I didn't expect it. Maybe some of you did. And the blood blooms above her breast. And you just see that red spreading across her blouse. It's done. And maybe she's done what she wanted to do the whole time, or what she'd been wanting to do for a long time. As I said at the beginning, this is a woman trying to obliterate herself. But I don't think she does it alone. I don't know if she is her own killer. I think she's obliterated by a lot of different things in her life. Maybe by her father dying in the asylum. Maybe by her mother, who was too controlling and possessive. By Walter, who was manipulative, I think. And a rapist. He raped her. So I think she's obliterated not just by herself, but by the world she inhabits, the people who are in that world, the way they treat her, the things that they do to her. But she's not innocent in any of this, right? I mean, she has done so much violence to other people. Whether it's Anna, with her hand in the glass, or her mother who she tried to hurt. She's done a lot of violence to other people, but she does the most violence to herself. There's something that she hates about herself. You can tell. And she finally obliterates herself and kills herself, I mean, we don't know. She stabs herself and then she walks out of the theater into the night. We don't know what happens to her. I would assume that that is like a mortal wound, that she has killed herself, but she keeps walking. I mean, it's the most shocking scene I think I've ever. It's one of those where you should see it without knowing what's going to happen. You should see it for the first time, and you should feel that shock. Again, Haneke makes violence visceral. He makes us feel it. He makes us sensitive to it. He awakens us and shocks us with this act of violence. But I think the film asks us to think about what led to this. What were the experiences that led Erica to this moment? And it wasn't just her by herself. There were a lot of things that conspired in her life to make her who she was and to destroy her in a lot of ways, to destroy this woman who then destroys herself. But this is a very powerful film. I mean, I don't have any overarching thoughts to share with you. I have no big conclusions or anything like that. It's just one of those films, and I've shared all of it with you. I've put my heart and soul out there, and why I feel sometimes a personal connection to it, and why I think it's just so powerful. One of the most powerful films about violence, about men and women and sexual relations and gender relations, and just this woman, this character that I've never seen before, who is so contradictory and so complicated and so repulsive and disgusting at times. She's all of it. She's all of it at once. And that's really powerful to me, I think. That she is all these things. And I think she's always also fighting for some sort of power in her life. That it's like everybody around her has power over her, whether it's her mother or whatever. Especially her mother. Her mother has so much power over her and controls her and wants to know where she is all the time and is calling, and she never has that power. And I think she tries to find power and find dominance through other means. She's just, at the same time, she's always subjugated in her own life. Other people always have power over her to some extent, but she's always fighting to get it back. But then at the end, it's just over, Such an intense, brutal film. There's no words for it. So, I mean, yeah, I'm done. I'm done. I've gone on long enough and talked about enough stuff. But thanks so much for listening. I hope that you liked this episode. I know it was long. I know it was intense and graphic at times. I appreciate you sticking with me. We got through it, okay? I'll try not to talk about these things anymore, but I had to talk about some graphic things. So I appreciate you going on this journey with me as I talked about this film. It's very intense, and there's nothing else like it that I've seen personally. So it's just one of those films that I think will always haunt me to some extent. So I'll stop here. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep watching great films. Bye for now.